Energy Media readers, we are going to talk today with Brian Livingston of the C.D. Howe Institute about the CN strike and its effect on crude by rail shipments out of Alberta. So welcome to the interview, Brian.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So Brian, just give me an overview of what kind of an impact this is having on Alberta producers.
Well, I'm going to start by quoting John Lennon and Harold Macmillan. John Lennon once said, life is what happens to you while you're busy making plans. And Harold Macmillan once said that in politics, the most important thing is events, my good man, events. Everybody had all these wonderful plans for crude by rail. And now this rail strike has come along. It's a significant event for all of Canada, not just for the oil industry. There's a lot of chemicals industries, manufacturing, mining, farmers, they're all affected by this. As far as the oil industry is concerned, crude by rail, there's about 310,000 barrels a day that went out in August. That gives you a sense of the volume. CN takes about 60% of that, so it's about 170, and CP therefore takes the balance of 140. If you take the 170 out, the market's going to react. And I looked this morning and the market went from, the WCS price went from $41 last Friday to $33 today. So like most markets, they don't look at things the way they are, they look at the way things will be, and they see a great disruption. CP can probably pick up some slack, but it's like if Air Canada went on strike, WestJet couldn't pick up all the slack, and CP won't be able to pick up all the slack.
So this sounds like it's going to be a big problem. Who exactly is going to be affected? Now I know Cenovus, amongst the big players, Cenovus is a fairly significant shipper by rail, and I believe Imperial does as well. Who else is going to be affected by this?
Well, you've identified the top two ones. I think that CNRL would like to get a little bit into rail transport. Suncor is affected because it has refineries in the east, and it has to get its crude feedstock from Alberta down into Ontario and into Quebec. So it will be affected as well. So those are the major ones that will be affected. The smaller producers, they are affected indirectly. As I mentioned, the price of crude, WCS has gone down, so it's affecting their netbacks.
What do they do in the meantime? Does do they cut back production? Do they put it in storage? A combination of the two?
Combination of the two. This may, if this lasts for a while, we may see November of last year repeat itself in November of this year. In other words, the WCS discount just blows out. I mean, that happened when the Keystone spill happened a couple of weeks ago. The discount expanded, i.e. got larger, and it started to come back, and now this strike is making it expand again. The interesting thing, I think, is what are governments going to do about it? This is a man-made, inflicted, if I can use that word, thing. This is something that governments could do. Already the federal government has said, we've got our Minister of Transport, Minister of Employment in there trying to mediate, trying to help them settle, and they're saying we hope they settle. My boss used to tell me that hope was not a strategy. So hoping is not quite enough to do. The government of Alberta, both the Energy Minister and the Agriculture Minister, have said we want back to work legislation. Andrew Scheer, obviously the leader of the Conservative Party, has said we want to recall Parliament and have back to work legislation.
Any chance? We've seen back to work legislation over the years. Occasionally, some governments appear more prone or likely to do it than others. What's your take on a Trudeau government bringing in back to work legislation?
Well, funnily enough, today was supposed to be the announcement of the new cabinet, and events have overtaken it, and life happens to them while they were busy making plans for their new cabinet. So right now they are somewhat. They have not said that they will recall Parliament before December the 5th, which is their planned date. That's over 2 weeks from now, and there'll be a lot of pain and suffering from a lot of people, not just the oil industry, if the rail strike goes on for that long.
One of the things that we saw when production was curtailed beginning January 1st is a loss of jobs in the oil patch, and then that was to some extent because capital investment dropped, and to some extent it was because some of the big companies had to shut in production, and therefore the inevitable loss of jobs. If this goes on for any length of time, are we going to see something comparable, or at least we will see lower employment?
Well, if it went on for many weeks, perhaps yes. My sense is that it will not go on for many weeks simply because the downside, not only for the oil industry, but for many, many other industries is so large. I mean, the chemicals manufacturers, for example, if you read the articles as I was reading today, said, look, we can't operate without the rail. When I was in my former job, if a refinery lost rail transport, it lost a means of selling, i.e. transporting the diesel fuel that it made. So people need freight by rail every day. So I can't see that the government's going to wait 2, 3, 4 weeks to settle this.
Last question, Brian. Given the fact that WCS has an indirect effect on smaller producers, and we know that some of the smaller producers are really in bad shape, do you anticipate that this might push a few companies into bankruptcy?
Well, the short answer is I would say no. And the reason is because whoever might do that, lenders, would say the cure is worse than the disease. And this is only a short-term thing. And hopefully there is light at the end of or whatever the metaphor you like, that things will get better if, as and when the strike is settled, the WCS discount will narrow and shrink, and we'll be back to where we were 2, 3 weeks ago.
Well, Brian, given the fact that we're talking about rail, light at the end of the tunnel seems to be an appropriate metaphor. Thank you very much for doing this. We'll look forward to our next chat.
Thank you, Markham. I know.